Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, happy days are here again. Well, understanding a question, well, that's half an answer. And this is Half the Answer, of course, with your hosts, Trent R. Nelson and Caitlin M. Green. We're both contributing editors over with Liberal Currents, and well, if you listen to the first episode, as you should have, well, we do a lot more as well. And Caitlin, what kind of wonderful guest and topic do we have today?
I have brought you a true gift today, Trent. I hope you are excited. Today
Always.
We're going to be talking to my friend Katie Talhelm. She is a public library manager in Texas and serves on the Texas Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. She works with that committee to help bring awareness to individuals, groups, and other organizations of the ongoing challenges facing Texas with regards to censorship and book bans. She also uses her role to help influence local library policy to ensure that the tenets of intellectual freedom are upheld, not just at her library, but at libraries in the surrounding area as well. Katie, I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to be here. Intellectual freedom and honestly, librarianship is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it, and I love getting to share my knowledge and expertise on it.
You know, when we go to the library, we see the public-facing part of the library, but your average person is just not aware of the decisions and the processes that happen behind the scenes to get us the books that we see, to get us the programs that we see, and the staffing activity, all of that stuff. We don't really know. And so all we have is like assumptions and unfortunately media personality opinions to go off of. So I'm going to read you a couple of quotes and then we're going to jump off from there. Ready? Okay.
All right.
From the foreword of Project 2025, quote, "Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders." Chris Rufo on Fox, the Jesse Waters show, they're using these dirty books. They're using smut. They're using pornography. They're using everything they can to dissolve the moral notions of children and their families just to play politics and just to advance the Marxist dream. From the New York Times opinion section, woke librarians, by which I mean librarians who see it as their duty to promote progressive views on race, policing, sexuality, and other issues, are everywhere. Are you everywhere, Katie? Are you everywhere?
No.
Wokeism?
Honestly, I need more staff is really the answer.
You know, they talk as though the children weren't being sent into the mine shafts 110 years ago. I mean, this sort of moral dissolution, the children are going to be fine. They love learning. They are not at all averse to new things. It's the adults who are so often averse to the different thoughts, Katie.
I agree with that. One of my big things that I do at my library. So just to give you some background, I primarily work with our youth services staff, and that's kind of like a library term. But for more of like our general populace who might not know, like, what does youth services entail? It's I basically look at, collections for kids and teens. I look at the programs that we provide for kids and teens. I look at the types of services that we might provide. So stuff like tutoring and phonics and other things like educational related, where we would provide that at a public library just to kind of supplement educational knowledge that they're getting in school. I do outreach. We go to different community organizations. We do school outreach. We do daycare outreach. We go and talk to parent groups and other family-oriented spaces to kind of inform them of these services that we provide to our community and to their families. A lot of people don't know that this is something that the library even provides to them. Like, we talked about misconceptions and misassumptions.
Right.
A lot of people see like the library is like, oh, well, they just have books there. That's all they do. they just sit around and read all day. And I was like, you know what? I would love to read all day, except that I work a 60-hour work week where I am doing data analysis on reading scores and the trends between like educational attainment and our community. It's like, so, you know, I would love to be able to do stuff like that. But the reality of what my job entails is we're trying to find the best way to engage our community in the pursuit of knowledge, in learning how to build skills that turn them into functioning members of society. You know, when we talk about stuff like, oh, well, the librarians are out there and they're indoctrinating our kids. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. Nobody has time for that. I was like, I just want your kid to read. And if I can get them to read, then I'm happy. I just want them to do well in school. I want them to be able to pursue a hobby or a skill that they've never been able to learn before. I want them to come into the library and experience joy in something, whether that's a paint project or we do escape rooms sometimes. And, you know, that, you know, people don't get to do escape rooms because it costs money. And we turn something that is, you know, not accessible to a good portion of our community into something that they can access and have fun with.
That is so cool. I need to look up if there's an escape room at my library. Damn.
Seriously.
Yes, you should. You should
Yeah.
absolutely. We do a whole bunch of stuff. Like I have video game tournaments for kids. We've done murder mystery parties. I did dodgeball in the library once. I've done Nerf wars.
Yes.
Like we do all kinds of stuff, and it's, you know, all supplemented by, we're trying to teach some skill, whether it's a hard skill or a soft skill. You know, everything can always be boiled down to like, we're trying to teach communication to these kids and like how to work as a team, or we're trying to, you know, teach them something tangible like science or math, or how to build reading skills, or how to even get interested in reading.
Right.
And so when you have somebody that boils down my position to, oh, you are a groomer who is indoctrinating children and you're a pedophile and you're exposing them to harmful content. And I'm like, where?
Yeah.
What content? Right. I don't know what you're talking about, because last I checked, you know, when I go into story time and I read 2 books about animals, like I don't know what's wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. One of my big hobby horses I like to stress out about basically is the way that treating you like you're a child predator or a groomer really licenses extreme action on the other side to like prevent you from accessing children, right? Which is why we have stuff like the Libs of TikTok account, you know, pointing out, look at this woke librarian, how scary is this? And then the next day there's like bomb threats being called into the library or the school or even a hospital.
Terrible.
You know, it's really terrifying. We out here in the Pacific Northwest have had issues with paramilitary gangs showing up like at drag queen story hours and frightening the families, and even like chasing a dad and his son out of like a family friendly brunch. It's pretty freaky sometimes. And it comes back to the permission structure that's created by telling people these people are going to hurt children. We got to stop them from hurting children, right?
Right.
And that honestly it's something that we take into consideration whenever we go out and we do talks with other groups about, like, you know, even just in outreach, we get people that will come up to us and say like, do you guys have porn in the children's section? And we've had to talk about that at the management level, not just at my library, but also at the state level of like, how do you answer that question in a way that's not going to be seen as like combative?
Yeah, because no isn't going to do it, right?
Yeah, no is not going to be a sufficient answer for some of these people.
No, sir, we do not. Next question.
Come in and check yourself. I mean, I don't know what you want.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because there is a very clear correlation between the people who come in and talk about porn being in the library and whether or not they're an actual library user.
Yeah,
I
get that.
Very real situation that this happened. I was at a library advisory board meeting, and it was one of the meetings that we had when we were discussing putting LGBTQIA plus books on display during Pride Month. And this issue had gotten so prevalent that our library advisory board meetings, which are normally open to the public, never have people who show up to them. Where we now have like 200 people sitting in the audience, and you're just like, oh, okay. And because they're open to the public, we have to allow public comment on agenda items. And I was kind of the person sitting up at the front desk and taking people for like, do you want to speak on an issue on the agenda? Like, which issue do you want to speak on? And like kind of reminding them like what the rules of engagement are. And I had this gentleman walk in and he looked at me, and I was, at this time, I was like the only person in the lobby. And he's like, is this where the book ban meeting is happening?
I'm sorry, what?
And I was just like, I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to. It's like, this is the library advisory board meeting to talk about, LGBTQIA books being on display. And he was like, oh, well, yeah, I just got this email saying that I needed to come and show my support for book bans. And I said, okay, well, the meeting starts at this time. If you would like to fill out a comment card, here you go. At this point, it was like an hour before the meeting started. So I was like, if you want to go to the library, it's literally right across the courtyard from where we're sitting. And he looks over at the building that I pointed out. And of course, this is like our downtown library. It is the biggest library in our system. It's 3 floors. It's huge. It takes up like half a city block. And he looks at it and he's like, oh, I didn't know we had a library here.
Cool. Okay. So I'm getting flashes of those like adults that show up to the school board meetings and it turns out their kids are in private school, right? Like this whole thing kind of smacks of top-down organization, right? This doesn't feel entirely grassroots when people are getting emails that are like, go here now, talk about how you want these books taken out of the system. So what has been your experience with that?
So I actually looked into this. We don't actually have a Moms for Liberty chapter in my city or county. However, we do have, which great, I'm happy. That being said, we do have there's surrounding counties that are close by that have Moms for Liberty chapters where we've had people come in from like, an hour away and they're like, I'm going to speak about this issue, even though they are not a resident or even a taxpayer as a business in our area. So that's interesting when you have somebody who's just like, I don't live in this community, I don't work in this community, to come in and be like, this is how your community needs to be run. And then we do have an organization here that is, I would say, probably a little bit more grassroots, but they're taking a lot of their plays from like these big organizations like Moms for Liberty, where they're, coming in en masse with a bunch of people. They're organizing like on Facebook, talking about how all these different meetings that need to happen and where to go and what to talk about. They're giving them talking points. And it's all very much just repetitive from, you go look at what Moms for Liberty has on their website, and it's basically the same talking points.
Right.
And it's all coming down to like, this content is harmful for kids. This, the people who provide this content are groomers and pedophiles. And it's very inflammatory language that is meant to incite and meant to get people angry, when the reality of the situation is like, I can go pull a book, any book off of the shelf in my children's section and read it. And I'm not even talking about skimming it. I'm reading it and being like, where is the pornography? Where is the smut? Where is the harmful language and rhetoric that you guys are talking about? What indoctrination is happening here that you are so afraid of?
So what is the content that they're actually upset about then?
They're upset about the fact that we include stories about queer people, the fact that we include stories about BIPOC people. Those are the ones that are primarily getting challenged. There was a book that got challenged recently at my library that was talking about the race riots in Missouri. And they were like, well, this is not an appropriate topic for children. And I'm like, it says who?
Yeah.
Right.
Some kids have to live through it.
Yeah, it's like, just because you're white upper middle class in Texas doesn't mean that you get to be the be all end all for what children are allowed to read and consume.
Yeah. Also, I had to live through the Oklahoma City bombing because I lived in Oklahoma as a small child, and they had to talk to us about it because some of us had family members that were there or nearby. They couldn't just like put a black screen over it and be like, don't worry about it, guys. Sorry about your uncle. Like, like we had to talk about it. Sometimes things happen in the world and kids need to know about it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, growing up in New York, I remember 9/11 and, the parents coming in to say goodbye to their children. And it's a moment you never forget. And you know that you've you're different after experiencing it, but it's not something that if it's happening, you have to know about it. You've got to be a part of existence. Now, Katie, you said something earlier that really struck me. You said that you and the library, you all provide innovations that people may not otherwise get to experience, such as escape rooms and Nerf wars and all those types of things. But books, they are the thing at the very core that you provide that people may not have access to. And I think that it is often taken for granted because we have the internet that, well, information is cheap and we can find it anywhere. But the library still offers a sort of organization which allows for information to be understood cogently, as opposed to
context.
Right, as opposed to the internet, which, as I've noted before, is, for many individuals, it's like freebasing little bits of information. You don't get a clear understanding of anything, but you feel this incredible rush of, oh my goodness, I do know everything from this 10-second video. Amazing.
Yes, books are at the very heart of the library, and that includes all types of books. So we have, obviously physical copies of books, and that probably is the majority of our collections. But we also have a sizable ebook collection or audiobook collection or some kind of e-content so that people can consume media in the written word and information in whatever way that they choose. But you're right. It's interesting because the number of people that come in and they're just like, I saw this on TikTok. Like, what's the deal with this?
Oh, wow.
And oh no, the converse of that is when I said I saw this on TikTok and I'm now taking this as fact, and I need you to I want you to find stuff that supports my position now.
Okay, so I walk into your library and I'm like, TikTok said I should give my children raw milk. Can you help me find out more about raw milk for my children? What do you say to me?
So I, as a librarian, have to kind of remove bias from that. So like me as a person, just your normal citizen is going to be like, wow, that's a really dumb idea to feed your kids raw milk because it's unpasteurized. And, the pasteurization process is really helpful in making sure that, you don't get sick.
Yeah, but you say that and I'm like, you woke librarian, and I storm out, right?
Oh, no. I wouldn't even say that as a person. I wouldn't say that. As a librarian, though, it is my job to find information that you are looking for. So I'm like, like you say raw milk, I've done stuff. I have to do research on like homeopathy or stuff that, like the merits of acupuncture, where, as somebody who lives with a doctor is going to be like, this is, like science does not, provide support for these kind of like alternative medicines or alternative situations where you're looking into, but it's not my job to pass judgment on you as a citizen. If you want more information about raw milk, I'm going to give you more information about raw milk. I'm also going to give you information about the pasteurization process so that you can see like basically the merits of both sides of that issue. It's not my job to push one side or the other. It's my job to give you a full and clear, concise viewpoint of the issue as a whole.
That's so interesting because I read in the New York Times that you're not doing that actually you just put the woke stuff on the shelves and you won't ever show anybody the works of like Thomas Sowell or whatever.
Who's asking to read the works of Thomas Sowell?
Honestly,
you'd be surprised.
It's just the guy who runs that Thomas Sowell quotes Twitter account. That's who needs
it. Yes.
So I think a question that keeps getting asked, and we're the podcast about questions, right? A question that keeps getting asked that is premised on absolutely wrong premises is, why don't you support viewpoint diversity? Why are you only willing to show, how come it's all Ibram X. Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates on the shelves and it's never John McWhorter? And the answer to that is, don't ask me that. That's a bad question, right? So can you talk to me about like the selection and shelving and the process by which you're actually figuring out what goes out to the patrons of your library?
Absolutely. So, Trent, just so you are aware, Caitlin actually kind of asked me this question in jest yesterday, and my response to her is I actually have both of those authors on my shelf,
Yes.
shelved in the same location.
It was so great because it was like one of only 2 examples that was in one of the op-eds that I read to prepare for this.
Right.
And they were like, libraries don't want to put woke racism right next to how to be an anti-racist. And they should, because that would be.
You could go to the 305 section of the adult nonfiction, and both of them are right there, shelved alphabetically.
Well, that privilege is Kendi, because that starts with K, and I think that's wokeism.
Okay, you can take that up with the ghost of Melville Dewey.
I was going to say, shout out to
the
the Dewey Decimal System. We don't have to teach you anymore, but...
No.
Not shout out to the librarians.
Not shout out to Dewey Decimal System. That's like a whole nother podcast.
Great. We'll have you back to talk about why the Dewey Decimal System.
Why Melville Dewey sucks. Anyways, so let's talk a little bit about like selection process. So this is going to go back to basically one of the major tenets of librarianship, which is the intellectual freedom piece and the right to access information piece. So the American Library Association, and I know I'm going to get in so much trouble for even mentioning them because they're obviously nothing but like a Marxist organization that does nothing but promote wokeness in libraries. But the American Library Association has been around since like the late 1800s. Now, it was founded by a bunch of like self-aggrandizing old white men who were like very self-important and inflated on their own egos. And they were like, we need to have like importance in libraries.
Classic.
And blah, 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 blah. Obviously, Melville Dewey was one of those people, and it really wasn't until 1939 that they really started taking up this mantle of intellectual freedom and right to access information. And I'm sure as a historian, Trent, you can understand why in 1939, something like censorship would become an issue.
Well,
in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know the famous pictures from Nazi Germany of the book burnings, and of course those were those are from Magnus Hirschfeld's Sexual Institute. And this really, I think, as we spoke about with Bradford Vivian in the past episode, there is this intersection of queer and transgender ideology that really sparks contempt from the reactionary side across, whether it's from the Index Expurgatorius or Germany, or seemingly what we're dealing with here. What do you say about that?
So it's very interesting, the parallels that we see with what's going on in the world right now versus what happened in the late 1930s and 1940s with World War II, especially when it comes to censorships and book bans and even book burnings in some cases, because that's ongoing now. And a lot of that literature is like LGBTQIA forward literature, and it's interesting in the sense that for something like the Library Bill of Rights, which has been around since basically World War II and has gone through several revisions and basically to keep up with the times, and none of the language really has changed, which is just that in libraries and in the United States too, First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of thought is an inalienable right. And that's really what the basis of the Library Bill of Rights is, similar to the U.S. Bill of Rights. The right to access this information in libraries is your right as a person in this country. And so when we come to this idea that we're only providing woke books,
right,
or whatever that means, I don't even know, or not opposing viewpoints, that's objectively false, because we provide all kinds of books. And it's often at, like personally speaking, like there's a lot of books on the shelf in the library that I don't agree with, both like morally or ideology or whatever, but it is not my place to say what information somebody can consume.
Right.
I would love to see all of Bill O'Reilly books to go into the dumpster. So he's got a number of like adult nonfiction books, and he's also written some children's series about like the founding of America, which I'm sure you can understand is just amazing. And
I'm sure
it's stuff that,
just a perfect.
oh, absolutely. But it's stuff that ends up on the shelf right next to, like a factual recounting of like what the, signing of the Declaration of Independence was like, and the Revolutionary War. So, this, like I said, people only are going, they're going into libraries and they're cherry picking what pieces of literature they want to focus on. They're not, I get comments from people all the time that are like, I wish you guys had more Christian books. And I was like, Christian books in what sense? There's a whole section in the nonfiction section that's literally dedicated to Christianity.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to know about Christian? I have 6 copies of the Bible, 6 different copies of the Bible on the shelf right now. Like, what do you want to know? And that really is kind of just like this idea that like they don't know really and truly what is going on in a library when it comes to the selection process.
Yeah, so far the answer to the question, why don't you have X, from you has been, we do have it. We have it right here. It's shelved. It's available.
Just come in and see it. Right.
Yeah. Just go look for it. Just come in.
It's here.
Come look for it. Come ask about it. We'll give it to you. Like, we're not going to gatekeep that information from you.
Okay, so I want to talk about orthodoxy and not, viewpoint diversity, just to give some historical context, because I love rhetoric and I love history and I love this book, Campus Misinformation by Bradford Vivian. So, in chapter 7, he talks about the phrase liberal orthodoxy and how it first showed up in the 1950s in the National Review. Now, why is the 1950s a time where people were really worried about the liberals being like forcing their beliefs on us? Well, that would be segregation. So as a reaction to integration, we got this idea of liberal orthodoxy. And then in the 2000s, we have Princeton professor Robert P. George, who's like a Catholic rights guy. And his work has been a lot about getting the phrase orthodoxy into the lexicon for today against secularists, feminists, people who promote sexual liberation.
For shame.
He says anyone who No, right? He says anyone who dissents from the new orthodoxy must face anti-discrimination statutes and ordinances and or public shaming, ridiculing, and hounding. And of course, what he means there is that if you have regressive views about gender, race, or sex, people might not like you very much. And that to him is oppression. And that to him is censorship. And that perspective has really made its way into basically every media outlet where they talk about you and what you're doing. You're out here giving information to people that they want from all kinds of viewpoints. You're offering them the conservative stuff. You're offering them the woke stuff, in quotes. And they're saying like, well, because you're offering the woke stuff, that means that you're actually discriminating against me, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. The only way to make sure that Americans are free is if you're not allowed to tell me stuff.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, it really comes down, like I said, I think all librarians are kind of guilty of this in a sense, is that we have a tendency to overshare in any kind of situation. And so, if someone comes and asks me a question, I'm going to give them an answer. It may be an overshared answer where they got more information than they bargained for, but it's like, my life is information.
Right.
I'm going to give you information.
Yeah, you have the same problem as teachers where someone comes up to us with like a half of a question and we're like, let me bend your ear for 10 solid minutes.
Yeah, let me give you my dissertation on this subject.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. You know better when you know the foundation. 10 minutes is no big deal.
Nothing hurts more in my heart than having had something to say and not having gotten to say it. So you're going to
Absolutely. You know what? I agree. One of the things about librarianship, especially like public librarianship, is that we tend to kind of we know a little about a lot of things. And sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes it's like kind of a dangerous thing because, we always have to like check biases. We have to check our own personal, morality scales and everything else when we're disseminating information, just because it's like, do I know enough about this to confidently like portray the viewpoints that are available, or is this something that I myself need to research more before I can talk about it? which is part of the reason why when someone comes and asks a question that, they want information on, it's like, I need to do my own research before I can provide you with, correct
Right.
factual information. Part of my library degree, especially nowadays, is media literacy. It's learning like how to discern what type of media is factual, and like how do I tell somebody that the media that they're consuming
Right.
is actually garbage.
Mhm.
We teach classes on it for adults and for kids about media literacy and like what to look for to make sure that, the content that they're consuming is actually, based in fact. It's not based in somebody's like random opinion about something that they saw on the internet that got spewed by 3 other people. And it's hard. It's hard, especially in today's age where a lot of media is consumed in, 10 to 30-second videos on TikTok, or it's a news headline on Reddit that they don't even read the article about.
Right.
And the news headline
Like
has
where it
become
came
so
from.
sensationalized that you're
Right.
like, I don't even know what's true anymore.
So back in the 90s, one of my very favorite discourse studies guys, Toon Van Dijk, I don't actually know how to say his name. I'm so sorry. I only read it. But he wrote about the idea of like the aesthetics of news and how it can be hard to tell the difference between true news that satisfies all the conditions of newsworthiness and other stuff. And I think since the 90s, it's gotten so much worse because there's so many websites that look like they are legit newspapers, but they're like, the Dallas Daily Observer Picayune, and it's like someone just made that up this morning and they put it on a website, right? Or TikToks or YouTube videos where they've set up a home studio that looks like a news desk or that looks like a legit podcast from a real distributor, and they're truly just doing it for the TikTok, or even on our legitimate mainstream media. Sorry for the bunny ears. The the legitimate, media empires that have real news portions, the opinion portion can actually be a little bit hard to detect which thing you're looking at if you're not careful. And those opinions could just be anything, right? Every time I go to one of these New York Times polemics and I'm like, I'm going to click on all the links of all the examples to see if they fit, and most of them do not fit the argument, then it seems a little irresponsible and honestly hard for people to look at and know what they're looking at for real.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard for us sometimes. As professionals who are actively trained in how to spot things like that, it's hard for us to go to a news website and really source it, like look at it and be like, is this a valid news source? Is this something that is really something that we can present to our community as factual? All we really can do is our best in that regard, and we try to do our due diligence and making sure that like the sources that we're pulling information from, obviously are well recognized as being either like non-biased or objective, or at least has supporting evidence that's also non-biased or objective or subjective. And it can be difficult, especially when you're on a reference desk somewhere and you have a patron standing right in front of you, like, give me this information now. And you're like, okay, let me just find this real quick for you and see. Which also goes into another thing, because that's one of the classes I had to take in order to get my master's degree was on how to perform effective searching. So they actually teach you how to do any type of database or information to find information that you're seeking quickly, and how to structure those prompts so that you get what you're looking for. And then, so we actually had to get that training so that we could be in that reference situation where someone's like, gimme. And I'm like, okay, give me like 2 seconds and let me like sweep through this real quick and find something that's going to fit your need, but also not be like some rando blog from 2010.
Right. You got to have those like Terminator view, like where it's
like,
okay, checking sources, like looking at the URL.
That GIF with like the lady and it's got like all the math stuff in front of her face. That's me when I'm searching for somebody's answer.
So
somebody's
Katie,
question.
You are down in Texas, where they do speak about banning books, And they do use that type of incendiary and what I would call violent rhetoric towards learning and education. Well, up here where I am in Illinois, we actually have a ban against book bans. Now, you, with all of your brilliant knowledge, I would like to know, can you let us know what type of negative effects tend to occur, if you know historically, to societies where they ban certain types of books?
I can't imagine.
Oh, you mean other than the fact that, people get militarized and buildings get militarized for this? I will say that, history tends to not look favorably on people who ban information and restrict access to information. You can take that however you feel in that regard. It sure worked out great for the Nazis, am I right?
I mean, right now I'm just watching these measles outbreaks get like geographically closer and closer to where I live, going, jeez, if only
Ugh.
people were better informed.
It's interesting that you bring that up because my husband is a doctor here where we live, and he just had to have a call with basically the entire hospital staff about measles outbreaks and how to like handle them. And they're just, and the whole vibe of the call was like, well, just inform people about vaccines. And I'm
Right.
like, people don't want to be informed about vaccines. They've already formulated their opinion that vaccines are bad for whatever reason. And it's a situation where you can't like logically talk somebody out of an argument that they've like emotionally put themselves into. And that's really what I feel like this type of rhetoric kind of surrounding book bans happens, is that people are not thinking about this logically. They're thinking about this on a very emotional, visceral level, which is why using that very inflammatory language works so well, is because it's appealing to somebody's emotional, it's like the emotional impact of like protecting the kids from bad things.
Again, like, I'm struck by this sort of interesting historical dichotomy whereby Edward Jenner, the individual who's credited with the smallpox vaccine, right? Many of his writings and quotes, they express a certain triumph of joy because of the feeling of providing a certain freedom that had never yet been experienced in human civilization. The freedom to not be afraid of such a dreadful illness as smallpox, right? And
Right.
now, 200 plus years down the line, we hear the freedom to maybe get sick if, like, that's what we're into, right? Like,
If you want it.
We can't live in fear of like the iron lung or whatever. Like, we got to live our lives without all that stuff hanging over us. And the way to do that is not to inoculate ourselves against the diseases, but apparently
Right.
to just forget
Right.
they exist.
That's honestly, that I think is probably more frustrating than anything, is that there is a whole bunch of like recency bias that's happening with information where people are like, oh, well, this is only relevant for the like last 2 years. And so that's only the time period that I'm going to focus on. There's no focus on the historical nature of information and like why science has been relevant in medicine for over 100 bajillion years. I'm sorry, that's an exaggeration, but it's like
Billion years. You
a bajillion years.
love science here at this podcast. We do not endorse the use of the phrase a bajillion years.
Medicine has come a long way. A lot of the jokes from Once Upon a Time really were concerned with that the medical cures were often worse than the illnesses themselves, right? So we've really come a long way insofar as, I go to the doctor and I'm like, I have a headache, and he gives me something and it actually works, and it's not made of like possum bile,
Yes.
Great.
We're not going to bloodlet you either.
No.
Great.
Really
Right.
needed.
I'm not pale enough. Great innovations. Great innovations.
It's interesting that you brought up the cure for the smallpox vaccine and like his writings on it, just because I think, you think about something that's innovative like a vaccine, where you have basically the world is ravaged by something as terrible as smallpox. And you have one person. I mean, I'm sure he had a team of like subordinate scientists working with him and trying to figure this out. But like,
This is one of the best stories of history. This man made this connection that smallpox and cowpox, that these two must in some way be connected. And then, just for good measure, we named the remedy after the cow. So shout out to the cow and shout out to Edward Jenner.
Now, listen, that is a really beautiful story, and I love it, but we do not truck with the great man of history myth here on this podcast. Okay?
No, we do not.
He had friends and associates and helpers that brought him along.
you know, I always think about like medical innovation as like one of the really true methods, like awesome things that comes out of like just exploring the scientific method. Scientific method even has been explored since the beginning of time, even before it had an official name. And, you know, you can go back and look at any kind of innovation, any kind of anything really, and see the scientific method being employed. And it's great when you look at that and be like, wow, this is a really great accomplishment of somebody. You know, I look at the guys who worked on the insulin for type 1 diabetics. You had a whole group of kids that were dying because they couldn't produce insulin. And now you have insulin, and they are like, we're only going to sell our patent for $1 because there's no reason why this shouldn't be widely available for people. And then you get people at the pharmaceutical company wanting to jack it up 600% because they're greedy jerks. And so
there's my woke librarian.
So I love these stories of innovation because it's people need to, I feel like people need to hear stuff like that to see why something like this is so valuable.
And you know, one of the themes of that statement that you just made also is like how amazing curiosity is and how important it is to foster curiosity in people and allow them the freedom to explore ideas that maybe you as their supervisor don't feel extremely comfortable with, right? And also empathy and like human empathy and weighing.
Well, now who's woke? Like, I can't teach people empathy and kindness. What?
That's communism, Katie. That's communism. We can't have that. We're going to be Maoist China if you do that.
They're all euphemisms, all euphemistic buzzwords designed to make people get mad at you, Katie. Who could be mad at you, Katie? Come on, now you're just helping us learn about raw milk.
Right.
I just want to give you guys the information you want.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny that just in general, you know, I actually had somebody get upset because we had like a social emotional learning display up in our children's section that had books about like treating your friends nicely and, you know, making sure that like you use really like nice language and kind words and, you know, not being a mean bully to people. And someone came in and was just like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like, why are we teaching kids this? And I'm like, what's wrong with teaching kids how to be kind?
Yeah, that's like,
what's wrong with
pro-human?
I don't understand.
Fellas, is it communist to be kind? I mean, I'm struggling here.
Yeah. No, honestly, that is where that's where it's gone, right? We're at the place where it is communist to be kind. You are a Stalinist if you think other people should be allowed to live their lives. That is
whatever way they choose, you know?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I do think social emotional learning has come up in some of those polemics and things. So like James Lindsay, maybe Chris Rufo have used the phrase when they're talking about the Marxist plot to destroy your children from the inside. So, you know, I get it that somebody called and was like, social emotional learning. I'm pretty sure that's Marxist.
Well, it's become SEL education has honestly become so much of a buzzword now. It's like on the level with CRT. It's like you can't be teaching kids CRT, and I'm like, I'm not a professor at a university teaching about critical race theory. I have a picture book that shows a black kid. That's it.
Yeah. I also have noticed that like sometimes they will the kind of right wing will take similar phrases in different places to be evidence of a conspiracy when like it's also partly capitalism where some phrase got popular and the consumers of whatever that service is, be it education or library services or whatever, they want to hear that phrase. And so the school and the library use that phrase to make those people happy. So like, I was looking for preschools for my younger kid here in Oregon, and every single one is like play-based. We're a play-based system. We do play-based. And then I go in there and there's like tables and worksheets, and I'm like, that's not play-based then, is
It's not
it?
play-based.
Right? But if I didn't go check, I would be sitting from on the outside being like, oh my God, play-based preschool systems have taken over America and they're all doing it. It must be like some kind of plot, right? But really, it's just a buzzword that makes them look attractive to consumers.
Yeah, a plot to get Johnny like out running around, like learning about things. I mean, communism.
Yeah, that's the plot I want to be in on.
Right. I mean, this is what Plato was saying. This is not anything new. Plato was like, yeah, the children shouldn't know that they're learning. And then Kamensky said it, obviously centuries later. The children shouldn't know that they're learning. Just we have to inculcate learning as naturally fun. That's the trick.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that I learned when I was learning how to be a teacher was if you want them to remember something, make them laugh or make them cry. And I am not in the business of making children cry. So we got to go for laugh.
I mean, maybe not to your face.
Yeah, right.
No, not really. But a lot of the programming that we provide to early learners is play-based. There's always some facet of like play or like either parallel play or community play that's involved in it. Whether it's, we have like peripherals out or puzzles or toys or whatever, or we're actually doing something in the program itself that is play oriented.
Oh man, toddler story time is such a blast. Everyone needs.
It's so great, isn't it?
Toddler, like take them there because it's going to be a good time.
One of our most popular programs for kids under the age of 5 is actually like a music and motion story time. And we go in, we sing songs, we do dances, we have puppets, and we're just like, we're having a good time. Mm-hmm. And these kids, they may be learning like their ABCs that day, or they may be learning about animals or colors or shapes or something.
Yeah.
And, we're just having a blast. We routinely see like 60 kids in that class. And it's like, you have like people need to be aware that like what it means to be play-based is like it's not necessarily like you're just coming in and playing, even though that is a very important part of childhood development. It's also just a fact of like you get to come in and learn something while having fun.
Yeah.
And that really is like kind of a fundamental in reading as well, because people don't realize that you can read for pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know. Like, what?
The more stressed out your brain is, the harder it is to think and to like recall the skills and the lessons that you've learned in the past. So the more stressed out you are while reading, the worse you will be at reading. So if you get them to chill out and have a little fun, they will learn better.
I know, it's crazy. So my background, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I focus very heavily on human behavior. I'm kind of obsessed with it and like trying to figure out why people work the way that they work. And one of the things that we had to do testing on was stress and how it helped, like in terms of how people performed on exams, like especially college students. And there is a sweet spot of like not being stressed enough versus being too stressed. There's a sweet spot of like just enough stress for people to perform at like peak levels. And so getting somebody excited about reading, that's adrenaline, that's dopamine, that's all those really great like neurotransmitters that make people feel good and want to pursue something, is really what really drives people to want to read and get them excited about reading. And so I don't ever maintain that like a child is ever a bad reader or like they're not interested in reading. I'm like, you just haven't found the book. Like there is a book and everybody has a book. You talk to somebody who reads, they will tell you what book series it was or what book it was that got them interested in reading.
Yeah.
And for me, it was Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, nice.
I loved Anne of Green Gables growing up. And once I started reading Anne of Green Gables, I was like, I cannot stop reading. I want more books now. And
it was the mouse and the motorcycle for me.
Oh my gosh, yes.
What about you, Trent? What's your book? Do you have one?
Rutgers and the Water Snouts.
What is that?
It was a book written by a woman, Barbara Dana. She was actually the wife of Alan Arkin, the actor,
Oh.
and it was published in
Female author Trent, woke. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was published in 1969, and my mom, she used to read it to me all the time, and I still haven't because
amazing.
that's what you do when you're a book person, right, Katie?
Yeah, that's absolutely. So my mom was an English teacher, and I will say that honestly, a lot of my love for reading was really kind of established by her, just because, I mean, she's an English teacher. She was like, "You should read. You should like reading," and kind of forced me into it when I was younger. But like I said, once I found like the stuff that I was interested in, one of the great things about like having an English teacher as a parent was just, that curiosity, that willingness to go out and be like, okay, we're going to go to the library, and I want you to go and find a book that seems like you might be interested in it. Read a little bit of it, read the synopsis, look at the cup, do the whole like analysis of, a child looking at a book for the first time and figure out if that's something that you want to check out. And then we would go home and I would read it, and then at the time, I didn't realize what was happening, but my mom was basically engaging me in literary analysis at like 6 years old.
Goals.
And she would sit down and we would have conversations about like, well, what did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? What were the characters like? Who was your favorite character? Why didn't you like this character? What was the plot like? And, it wasn't necessarily using that language. I was 6 years old at the time, but, it was that kind of dialogue session. Now, again, English teacher as a parent, like not everybody's going to be have this kind of upbringing.
But you can have a community librarian.
You sure can have a community librarian who could sit down and have, like, we do book clubs and we have books that come in and we want to challenge people to read things that are outside of like their normal scope of life.
Yeah.
Because, it does build empathy because you are looking at stories that are different from like your own lived experience, but also at the same time, it's just broadening your worldview of seeing like beyond the end of your nose. And a lot of the stuff that, happens sometimes, we're living in a time where people are very much like, I got mine, so screw you.
Right.
And, having these experiences really allows you to see like, okay, like maybe, yes, I'm going to look out for number one. Sure. Great. I think you should look after yourself. Like self-care is very important.
Right.
But at the same time, you can also hold space for other people and their experiences and understand that those experiences are different from yours. That, the person who goes to a Title I school is not going to have the same access to education as somebody who goes to a private school that costs $40,000 a year. And understanding what kind of life they might lead from that, and I'm sure you guys know the studies that show that people who are from low income backgrounds who go to Title I schools do not have high educational attainment and are more likely to, be in prison or not graduate from high school or, end up in a gang or end up on drugs. And it's like, well, if we could work on providing equity in that regard, then we can solve a lot of those problems.
Not equity, Katie. Oh my God. Okay. So this idea of letting a kid see the world beyond the front of their nose, right? That's extremely threatening to the people who are fighting to ban books. And part of it comes from this thing called the parental rights movement, right? Which started the first kind of iteration we've seen of the parental rights movement is, again, in the 50s. Big surprise. A reaction to Brown v. Board. It was parents who were fighting for the right of their children not to have to go to school next to Black children. And it came back in the anti-vax movement. It came back in like every time there's kind of an advance, right, in society, we have the parental rights movement saying it's actually my constitutional right to stop you from enjoying your rights, right? So now we have this parental rights movement that's involved in book banning. Can you just real quick before we finish up, give me a quick summary of the kind of laws that you're seeing in Texas that are restricting your ability to pursue intellectual freedom?
So really the big ones right now are focused on what constitutes obscene or harmful material. So in kind of like the book world, the idea behind something being obscene is something that has to be set forth by like a judge and a jury. Like it has to be decided in court what that means. And so there's a lot of laws on the docket here in the Texas legislature that are trying to redefine what obscenity is. We typically look at books in honestly all material in the like kind of in this like three-pronged system where, you know, they have to meet all three of these criteria in order for it to be considered obscene. And it's stuff it's like, okay, like this is something that is purely prurient in nature. Like and it has to be like
such a good word.
I know it's such a great word. I love it. And it has to be the whole work. Like you have to consider the whole body of the work. You can't just consider like the 5-page sex scene that happens in a 500-page book. So there's that. It has to be, you know, something that a reasonable adult would look at and be like, yeah, this is bad. And obviously like that's going to involve like social norms and community standards and everything else that, you know, you would take into consideration. And then the final part of this is that there has to be like no other merit from this. Like you can't have political merit, socioeconomical merit.
So like you can say, well, this has some kind of obscene or sexual material in it, but it's educational, so we can consider it.
Exactly. Yeah. So like for a good example of that being is people wanting to ban books that talk about puberty. And any kind of like sex education books because of the fact that they talk about stuff like sex, but they're approaching it from like a medical or educational standpoint. They're not like talking about it in the sense that, oh, like you can go watch porn and like know everything you need to know about sex.
Right. No, this is like anatomy and like informational stuff about what you need
to know. This is
informational before you go through it.
Yeah.
But isn't that to some degree, Katie, instructive of how they perceive even the education? The education itself is the pornography.
Yes.
That is what they really actually feel. It's not a matter of, as you said, sort of context. It's a matter of like, we're not talking about these things, period, end of story.
Period. End of story. I actually there was a person who came into one of my city council meetings who said that any depiction of sex, nudity, anything that had to do with the human body, anything like that was pornographic. So you're talking about like medical textbooks that are, you know, showing body parts and like naming those body parts for medical professionals was considered pornographic, or art books that were showing things like Venus de Milo that, you know, nude art was a very big thing in the Renaissance. Like, come on. And
you're going to see some breasts. Sorry.
You're going to see them. I'm sorry.
You're not going to see arms, but you're going to see breasts.
So like painting the human form is a thing. Like they teach college classes on that because it's such a big part of art and art history. And so it's stuff like that where you have these people that have that mindset of just like anything that's nude, naked, having sex, talking about sex, anything of that regard is pornographic. And so you're right. And so you're right. They're like completely eliminating the context of this. It's like, in what context are we doing this? Like they're, you know, and the other facet of that is that you have people who are coming in and saying like, my sex is okay. Like if I want to have dirty, kinky sex, I'm okay because I'm, you know, heterosexual and cis, and that's totally cool. But if like a queer person were to come in and talk about their experience as having sex, that's dirty and wrong. And therefore we shouldn't expose people to that.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're doing this sort of like drive towards normalizing the idea that the only acceptable way for people to find out about sex is like on their wedding night with their opposite sex partner. And like anything else would be unacceptable, right? And that's caused some really nasty surprises for people in the past and still does today. It's not a great system to go by, but it's the natural byproduct, or it's the natural endpoint, right, of this like parental rights, protect the nuclear family way of going about managing what people are exposed to, right?
Well, we could talk about Texas in that sense because Texas is like one of the highest states that has teen pregnancy incident rates, and we have the highest female mortality rates when it comes to, you know, bearing children. We also have the highest rates of like, you know, people who are incarcerated and everything else. And I'm like listing all these things, and I'm just like, this is, I want Texas to be good at stuff, but I don't want it to be like this stuff. I want it to be good at like,
we're so good at putting people away.
yeah, we're so good at institutionalizing people.
We are the best at not telling people how to manage their lives well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and in the idea behind sex education in Texas, if they get sex education in Texas, is celibacy based. Mm-hmm. It's basically teaching them, like, that coach in Mean Girls. It's like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant and die. And that is basically, if they even talk about pregnancy at all. Like, I've had girls who come in and talk to me, the librarian, not like, their parents or their school nurse or anything. They're like, I don't know what's happening to me, and it's because they just got their period.
Oh,
and you're like,
nightmare.
Cool. You're like, I am a librarian. I'm not a health professional. I'm not an attorney. I'm not like any of these things that you feel like. I'm not a social worker either.
I mean, we did a whole episode about all of the things that you as a librarian have been expected to do that should have happened in a different building with a different professional.
Yeah, for real.
But suffice it to say, you're looking at a situation where Texas is trying to repress the things that you can share with people that they need to live their lives. And I saw there was like a bill up that said, actually, for this like prurient interest stuff, the obscene materials, we're removing educational as a justification. So you can no longer defend yourself in court by saying this was educational material.
It's not just education. It's educational knowledge, or educational, informational, medical, anything of that nature. That language is being, the bills that are being put forth are removing that language as it pertains to obscenity. So I'm not sure about any other states, but in the state of Texas, we have something called an affirmative defense, which basically means that if someone were to bring charges against me as a library for providing, say, harmful material to kids, one of those affirmative defenses, it could be like, hey, like, I didn't provide this to a child because I felt like they needed to know, about pornography or having sex. I provided this information to a child because they asked me about their body going through puberty, and I have a book about puberty. Right. And it just so happens that there is a section on like sexual desire because that's part of puberty.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
And so they're removing that language entirely, or they want to remove that language entirely when it comes to providing defense against providing kids these type of materials.
They'll strip away the language that we can use until we cannot properly describe or transmit knowledge to anyone or anything. I mean, It is really dastardly.
What really tickles me, though, is that when they put these kinds of laws into place, they have like, I don't know if they're unintended consequences or just they didn't really think it in terms of like when they were writing these laws, because they think they're trying to attack like queer literature, transgender literature, or non-white stories, basically. But then what ends up happening is that like, well, we have to remove the Bible now because of all the stories in the Bible that deal with these very same issues. And then they're like, oh, wait, we didn't mean that kind of book ban. And it's like, well, no, your language, that's what your language says, though. But
they do expect that their policies will constrain others, right, and permit them to spread the messages that they want to spread, right? Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, this was very illuminating, Katie. Thank you so much for helping me understand that you are not actually indoctrinating and grooming the children. You're just giving them access to the information that exists in the world. And that's very helpful.
Yeah.
I love
whatever information you want.
Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking with us. This has been Half the Answer, where knowing the question to ask is half the answer. We will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.